Welcome, my friends, to Wisdom of Zodiac Signs, a space where we don't just skim the surface of horoscopes but dive deep into the ocean of human nature reflected in the stars. I'm glad you're here, because today we're taking on a subject that's equal parts tender and tempestuous, the darker side of Cancer, unmasking the ocean's storm. Now, don't worry, we're not here to villainize Cancers or paint them as hopeless mood machines. We're here to look with both honesty and compassion at what makes them beautifully complex, even when they drive the rest of us a little crazy. When you first meet a Cancer, it often feels like stepping into a warm kitchen on a cold night. They radiate safety, care, and that rare ability to make you feel seen without saying a word. They're the type who notices you shivering and hands you a blanket before you ask. But here's the twist: every ocean has its storms, and Cancer's heart is no exception. One moment they're gentle waves, the next, a tidal surge that leaves you wondering if you accidentally offended them by blinking too slowly. These so-called shadow traits aren't about malice. They're about survival. Cancers carry emotional radars so sensitive they can feel the tension you haven't even admitted to yourself yet. They cling to memories the way a novelist clings to metaphors, sometimes poetic, sometimes suffocating. And yes, they can retreat into laziness, not because they lack ambition, but because the weight of feeling everything can be as draining as swimming in cement shoes. So today, let's peel back the shell, laugh a little at the mood swings, and learn to see the storm for what it is, not destruction, but depth. Because as Buddhist wisdom reminds us, once you truly see, you cannot help but forgive. Cancer has long been a fascinating puzzle for anyone who studies the zodiac seriously, and after decades of exploring the patterns of astrology, psychology, and human behavior, I can say with confidence that Cancer represents one of the most paradoxical forces of the zodiac. They are at once tender and turbulent, devoted and defensive, nurturing and needy. Their symbolism, the crab, is almost too perfect: soft inside, hard on the outside, carrying their home on their back, retreating when threatened, and capable of holding on with claws that don't easily let go. To understand Cancer is to understand the tides of human emotion itself, and like the ocean, they are breathtakingly beautiful one moment and terrifyingly powerful the next. Let us begin with the emotional roller coaster. Anyone who has loved or lived with a Cancer knows that this metaphor is no exaggeration. If you've ever asked yourself what it feels like to live inside a weather report, spend a week with them. On Monday, you get sunshine, gentle laughter, cozy warmth, and empathy that could soften the hardest heart. By Wednesday, thunderclouds arrive, and suddenly you're caught in a downpour of tears, frustrations, or moods you didn't see coming. By Friday, they may be calm again, as though nothing ever happened, while you are still drenched from Tuesday's storm. Is this instability? Yes and no. Cancer is not reckless or impulsive in the way fire signs sometimes are. Their instability is tidal. Always shifting, always in motion, pulled by unseen forces much like the moon that rules them. It is beautiful, and it is exhausting. What complicates things further is that Cancer's emotions are not confined to their own experience. They absorb everyone else's moods as if they were Wi-Fi signals. This can be a gift, of course, because it makes them incredibly empathetic. They can sense when someone is hurting without a word being spoken. But it can also be overwhelming, like living in an apartment building where you pick up not only your Wi-Fi but everyone else's too, and none of it has a password. Soon, they are drowning not only in their own feelings but in yours as well. This sensitivity sometimes looks to outsiders like manipulation. But we must be careful here. Cancer does not manipulate for the sake of greed or power. They are not scheming like a darkened Scorpio or calculating like Capricorn at their most Machiavellian. Cancer's so-called manipulation is defensive. It is the crab retreating into its shell, or cautiously poking its claws into the situation to test the waters. Their nudges and adjustments are attempts to create emotional safety, not dominance. To psychologists, this might look like an attachment strategy. To Buddhists, it resembles clinging to security, a refusal to accept impermanence. To everyday people, it just looks confusing. And if you are the partner caught in the swirl, you may feel like you signed up for a roller coaster without realizing there was no seat belt. Humor, though, is often the best way to handle it. A friend of mine, married to a Cancer, once said, "Living with her is like checking the weather app every morning. I don't leave the house without an umbrella." Another joked, "I thought I was marrying a person, but I married a whole ocean." These jokes carry truth, because if you can laugh with Cancer through the storm, you begin to appreciate the depth behind it. Now, let us turn to the silent pride of Cancer, which is often overlooked because it is so unlike Leo's blazing self-display. Yes, Cancer has pride. But theirs is a quiet, understated pride that comes not from their own success, but from the people and places they cherish. They are proud when their family thrives. They are proud when their home feels like a sanctuary. They are proud when their loved ones lean on them and they have the strength to carry the burden. Unlike the signs who seek applause from the world, Cancer does not need the stage. Their pride is built in kitchens, living rooms, and late-night phone calls when someone needed comfort. And yet, this too has a shadow. Because pride, when unacknowledged, curdles into resentment. When Cancer feels their sacrifices are invisible, they may turn bitter. They can guilt-trip without meaning to, recounting every favor and every sacrifice in meticulous detail. If you've ever heard a parent sigh and say, "After everything I've done for you," you have heard the darker side of Cancer's pride. It is not cruelty, it is hunger, the hunger to be valued. This pride, however, is not the enemy. Properly understood, it is their foundation. Think of a grandmother who spends 2 hours describing how she cooked every meal for her children, how she worked 3 jobs, how she never let the house fall apart. That is Cancer pride. Not "look at me," but "look at how I loved." And if you truly listen, you will understand that behind the guilt-tripping, behind the wounded pride, is a heart that longs to know its care was not in vain. The Buddhists tell us that clinging causes suffering, and this is certainly true for Cancer. They cling to emotions, they cling to people, they cling to memories. But to dismiss this as weakness is to misunderstand it. Clinging, for Cancer, is their way of saying, "This mattered. This love, this sacrifice, this family, it mattered." And in a world where so much is fleeting, there is something profoundly noble about a heart that insists on remembering. So, what can we learn from the darker side of Cancer? First, that their emotional roller coaster is not chaos for its own sake. It is the natural movement of tides, and learning to flow with it rather than resist it is essential. Second, that their pride, though quiet, must be honored, or it will turn sour. And finally, that the traits we call flaws are often the shadows of their greatest gifts. For those who find themselves in close relationship with a Cancer, patience and humor are essential tools. Don't expect them to be stoic rocks, that is not their nature. Instead, meet them where they are, acknowledge their care, laugh with them when the storm passes, and remember that what seems like a flaw is simply another shade of their devotion. The crab may pinch, but it pinches because it is afraid of being dropped. In the end, Cancer is not unstable, manipulative, or self-righteous in the way critics sometimes claim. They are human beings with hearts wide open, struggling to protect themselves in a world that often feels too sharp. And if you have the wisdom to look past the storm, you will find an ocean vast, mysterious, and worth navigating. Cancer is one of those zodiac signs that carries its past around like an invisible suitcase, and the truth is, that suitcase is never light. If you have ever argued with a Cancer, you already know this secret: they do not forget. You may think you have closed the book on an old disagreement, you may believe you reached forgiveness, or at least a truce, but 10 months later, in the middle of a completely unrelated debate about who forgot to take out the trash, the memory resurfaces with startling precision. Well, remember in 2020 when you embarrassed me in front of my family? Suddenly, you are not talking about the trash anymore. You are in a courtroom where Cancer is both attorney and historian, presenting exhibits from a personal archive that seems endless. This attachment to memory is not a flaw in their design, it is part of their nature. Cancer is the historian of the heart. Every joy, every betrayal, every tenderness is carefully catalogued in their emotional library. It makes them incredibly sentimental. They will remember the day you made them laugh so hard they couldn't breathe, and they will keep the birthday card you tossed off without thinking, pressed into a drawer as though it were sacred. But the shadow side is real. Instead of allowing memory to become a gentle teacher, Cancer can let it become a jailer. They replay the wound, and in replaying it, they relieve it. In Buddhism, this is what is called samsara, the endless cycle of suffering caused by our inability to let go. Cancer, more than almost any other sign, risks being trapped in this loop. Their past becomes an anchor, their present becomes a battlefield of unresolved wars, and those who love them sometimes feel like soldiers conscripted into a conflict they didn't even start. Then comes vacillation, the famous mood swings. If you have ever tried to plan a spontaneous road trip with a Cancer, you already know how this goes. At 10 in the morning, they are enthusiastic, already picturing the snacks for the drive. By noon, they hesitate, wondering if it is really the best idea. By 2 o'clock, the trip is off, because they just don't feel up to it anymore. To outsiders, this looks like flakiness, a lack of commitment, an inability to follow through. But that interpretation misses the essence of Cancer's process. They are not adjusting to the world by external logic, they are adjusting to the world by internal weather. Cancer lives in the climate of feelings, not the clock of the calendar. If the emotional weather inside them does not match the activity, they simply cannot go through with it. To demand otherwise is to ask someone to swim against a tide that is already pulling them under. It is not spite, it is not sabotage, it is simply the gravitational pull of the moon, their ruling planet, exerting itself in the most personal of ways. This is why patience is the necessary currency in relationships with Cancer. To fight against their moods is like yelling at the ocean for having waves. You will tire yourself out, and the ocean will still be the ocean. The wiser approach is to learn the rhythm of the tides, to accept that there will be days of calm and days of storm, and to remember that both are natural. Finally, we must address what many whisper about but few name directly, Cancer's tendency toward indolence. Let's be honest. They can be lazy. Not lazy in the sense of someone who lacks ambition altogether, but lazy in the sense of retreat. When the world becomes too heavy, Cancer withdraws into the shell, and that shell sometimes looks like a couch, a blanket, and 12 hours of Netflix. Responsibilities get pushed aside. Emails remain unanswered. The laundry pile becomes a small mountain. To those around them, this looks like carelessness. But if you look closer, you will see that it is not carelessness, it is exhaustion. When you feel everything, your own pain, the unspoken stress of your co-workers, the grief of your best friend, and the fear from the evening news, you reach a point of saturation. At that point, the crab does not march forward. The crab hides. There is wisdom in retreat, but also danger. Rest is essential, avoidance is not. The Buddhist distinction between rest and indulgence is especially illuminating here. Rest restores energy. Indulgence delays growth. A Cancer who takes time to recharge will emerge from the shell with renewed energy and compassion. A Cancer who hides too long will stagnate, becoming sluggish, resentful, and more afraid of the world outside. Their challenge is to know the difference, to ask themselves honestly whether their downtime is serving their healing or simply postponing it. The humor in all of this is that Cancer usually knows their tendencies better than anyone else. They joke about it themselves. I once heard a Cancer quip, "I'm not moody, I'm just offering you all 4 seasons in one day." Another teased, "I'm not lazy, I'm just on emotional strike." There is truth in these jokes. They reveal a self-awareness that is both endearing and disarming. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson in observing Cancer's so-called darker traits, that what looks like a flaw is often the shadow of a gift. Their memory is long because their love is deep. Their moods swing because their hearts are attuned to rhythms most of us ignore. Their laziness is not neglect but survival, an attempt to shield themselves from drowning in the world's endless tide of feeling. As a researcher of astrology, psychology, and human nature, I have come to see Cancer not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be respected. The crab teaches us about the beauty and the cost of carrying emotional depth. They remind us that love without memory is shallow, that sensitivity without boundaries is overwhelming, and that retreat without honesty becomes avoidance. To love a Cancer is to love someone who carries the past in one hand, the present in the other, and who is always negotiating between the two. It requires patience, humor, and the wisdom to recognize that beneath the fluctuations lies a heart that only ever wanted to protect and be protected. And so, while Cancer may indeed get stuck in the past, vacillate in moods, or retreat into indolence, these are not signs of weakness. They are signs of humanity, heightened and magnified. If we learn to read them with compassion, if we laugh with them through the storms and honor them through the stillness, we will see that what we once called flaws are really just facets of an emotional landscape as vast and unpredictable as the ocean itself. When we step back and examine Cancer through a wider lens, it becomes clear that what some interpret as difficulty is, in truth, the cost of depth. Every zodiac sign carries its shadows, but Cancers are lived emotionally rather than intellectually, which makes them harder for others to ignore. A Capricorn can sacrifice intimacy in the relentless pursuit of success, and society often applauds them as driven. A Gemini may vanish mid-relationship, and we shake our heads with a knowing smile, saying, "That's just Gemini." But when Cancer's heart spills over, when their feelings crash like a storm against the shore, the world too quickly labels it weakness. That is not only unfair, it is blind to the very nature of their gift. The so-called flaws of Cancer, their clinginess, their mood swings, their retreats into silence, are not defects of character. They are side effects of a heart that refuses to be numb. Their emotional depth is their defining feature, and it carries both storms and serenity. For those who are fortunate enough to be among the chosen ones who receive Cancer's love, this truth is undeniable. Their devotion is dramatic, yes, and often messy, but it is also profoundly real. It is the kind of love that shows up in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning without being asked. It is the love that remembers your favorite soup when you are sick, the one that holds you quietly while the rest of the world collapses around you. And in the year of triumph 2025, when humanity itself is struggling to heal, to rebuild, and to rediscover authentic community, this gift of deep care is not just valuable, it is revolutionary. But like all revolutions, it does not arrive with order and harmony. It arrives with chaos, disruption, and the kind of emotional upheaval that rattles us into paying attention. And here, humor becomes an essential medicine. Cancers themselves are often the first to laugh at their own storms. I once heard a Cancer friend describe their moods not as swings but as symphonies, complete with crescendos and quiet interludes. Another quipped, "I'm not overthinking, I am just producing a 5-season Netflix drama in my head about what you meant by that text message." These self-aware jokes reveal something vital. Cancer knows they can be overwhelming, and humor is their way of softening the edges. For those who love them, laughter is a lifeboat in the middle of turbulent waters. It disarms the heaviness, it creates safety, and it reminds both parties that storms, no matter how wild, are temporary. If you can laugh with Cancer, you can weather almost anything together. So what, then, is the darker side of Cancer? It is not evil. It is not malicious. It is, quite simply, the shadow side of love itself. Their unpredictable moods, their silent pride, their refusal to forget old wounds, their retreat into indolence, all of it stems from the same root, a heart that feels too much. And rather than condemning that, perhaps our society should recognize its rare beauty. In a culture that often numbs itself with distractions and applauds emotional detachment, Cancer's ability to care deeply, even clumsily, is a kind of rebellion. Isn't that, in fact, what the world most needs? People willing to feel deeply. People who care enough to risk being misunderstood. People who, despite their fears and flaws, still choose love. When we pause before judging Cancer's shadows, we begin to see the lesson they offer, that emotional intensity is not a defect but a mirror, reminding us of our own vulnerability. Every storm has its rainbow. Every tide that recedes returns again. And every Cancer, no matter how armored or irritable, is simply trying to offer love in a world that often does not know how to receive it. This, then, is my encouragement to Cancer: cherish your emotional depth. Do not let the judgments of others convince you that you must harden or shrink. Learn the art of release, yes, so that the past does not weigh down your present. Learn when rest is healing and when it becomes avoidance. But above all, do not abandon your gift. For your gift is the very thing the world needs most: the reminder that compassion, memory, and care are not weaknesses but strengths. In your tenderness lies your courage. In your storms lies your beauty. Life is not meant to be lived as a straight, dry path, it is meant to be tasted, felt, and remembered. So go ahead, Cancer, indulge in your laughter, let your moods be music, let your devotion be seen. Enjoy life, for it is fleeting, and your ability to feel it fully is what makes it worthwhile. And to those who have joined me in exploring this journey into the emotional ocean of Cancer, I invite you to stay with us here at Wisdom of Zodiac Signs. If you found insight, laughter, or even a bit of recognition in today's reflections, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. The stars may not define us, but they guide us in understanding ourselves a little more clearly. And that, perhaps, is the greatest triumph of all.